getting that time of year, the weather changing. Let's keep Dwayne and Heather in our prayer. They hadn't been here in a while. I've meant to go out and try to see them, and I ain't done it. Yes, keep pegging them. Keep Cosmo in our prayer. Angie's not here this morning. Keep her and Johnny in our prayer. There's so many in need. Brother Mike, you want to lead us in prayer this morning?
Good morning. Good to be here this morning. Enjoying this weather. We're going to be looking this morning, still in the book of Exodus, at Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. And this lesson kind of backs up and goes to before a part of last week's lesson, and then it fast forwards to after last week's lesson. So at first when I started studying, I was like, what in the world have they done? Because we had freed the children of Israel from Egypt last week. But they wanted to do that because they wanted to focus on Jethro. So I believe that God strategically places people in our lives at just the right time to help us fulfill our calling. I believe if you think about the people that have come into your life and then left your life, they were there for a season, for a time, to help you to fulfill your calling. I believe in the same way that Satan will try to do the same thing. Satan will send people into your life strategically, place them into your life to try to pull you away from God and to try to get you away from your calling. So we need to be aware of that as we encounter people and have people in our lives. We need to be aware of that. Jethro was Moses' father-in-law, and he was placed in Moses' life for a season because he was a wiser man who served God, and he was there to give Moses counsel as to what he needed to do. Let's look at Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. So this picks up right after Moses killed the Egyptian and buried him in the sand, and then talked to the Hebrews about them fighting each other. And he realized that it was known he had killed an Egyptian, and Pharaoh was going to kill him, and he left and he fled Egypt. So this is where our lesson picks up today. It's chapter 2, verses 11 through 15. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian, spied an Hebrew, one of his brethren, and he looked this way and that way. And when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, Wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? And he said, Who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me, as thou killedst the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, Surely this thing is known. Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses, but Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Bible scholars say that Moses would have traveled about 200 miles into the wilderness, and he left behind everything he had known for 40 years. Can you imagine being a person that's living in a palace, having servants to wait on you hand and foot one day, and the next day you're traveling into the wilderness, probably with nothing but whatever you can carry on your back? And he traveled for about 200 miles, and he came there to that well, and he stopped at that well, and here he's going to have an encounter that's going to change his life. He had several encounters that changed his life. This is one of them. 16 through 22. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that ye are come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock." And he said unto his daughters, "And where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter, and she bare him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." So this priest of Midian that's mentioned there in verse 16, and this Reuel that's mentioned in verse 18, is the same person, and we're going to call that person Jethro. And so for whatever reason, the Bible didn't immediately identify him as Jethro here. That's who it is. This man had daughters. In fact, the Bible tells us he had, I believe it was 7 daughters. And these daughters are going out and tending the flocks. Apparently the man didn't have any sons, so his daughters were doing the work that needed to be done to care for his flock. And they encounter these other shepherds that are interfering with them watering their sheep. And Moses takes care of helping them to be able to water their sheep. And then they don't invite him home. They just go on their way and leave him there by the well. And when they get home and they tell their dad, why they've been able to get home so quickly, he's like, "Well, where's the man that rescued you from these shepherds? Where's the man? You left him instead of inviting him home with you?" They just were kind of, I just imagine they were a little bit clueless. They're just a little bit clueless girls, probably living with a daddy with no idea of really how to we don't have a mention of a mother here, so no idea really of how to respond to people. And they call Moses an Egyptian. So apparently he must have been dressed in some way or conducting himself in some way that they identified him as an Egyptian. So he comes to Jethro, who that name Reuel means friend of God. So he comes to this priest whose name means friend of God, and he shelters with him, and he's given a wife from those daughters to become his wife. So now he's beginning a family life there with Jethro and with this new wife there in the land of Midian. But Moses is not comfortable there. And we can know he's not comfortable there because he calls his son Gershom, which means a stranger in a foreign land. He feels out of place. Very often when God's calling us into something different, we get really uncomfortable and we feel out of place. We feel like we don't fit where we are. And that's because growing pains are difficult. Growing up, physically growing up, can be challenging. Growing up spiritually can be challenging. And we can feel like we're just all out of sorts. God, what in the world are you doing to me? I have said that more times than once. God, what in the world are you doing? God, I don't want to do that. You ever dealt with a kid that's growing up and getting old enough to do some kind of chore? And you assign them that chore, and like, but I don't want to. Well, it doesn't matter that you don't want to. You're old enough now to do it, and you're going to do it. Don't we respond to God sometimes the same way? But God, I don't want to. And God's saying, you've grown up enough. It's time for you to step out and do that. But God, I don't want to. I don't want a spanking from God. If you've got a child that's rebelling when you're saying, I need you to do this, sometimes it might get to the point of you spanking them and saying, look, I've told you to do it, you're going to do it. Well, God sometimes just has to spank us too. So let's be sure that we understand that we might feel like a stranger in a foreign land when God starts growing us up and calling us into something that he wants us to do. But we just need to do it. Jethro took Moses in, but Moses didn't necessarily fit in. You can't run forever from your calling and still be happy. That's what's going on with Moses. He's been called to bring deliverance to the children of Israel. And maybe he doesn't even yet know it. But God's calling him. God's growing him up. And he's on the run trying to figure out what to do. Moses probably even felt some shame. He had killed a man. He had violated God's law. Even though the 10 Commandments hadn't been given to the children of Israel yet and all that, God had spoken to his people. We all know, we have conviction that works in our hearts. We all know it's wrong to take a human life. That's just, that's just common sense. That's just common conviction. We all know that. And he may have felt some shame. And in his shame, there may have been some distance between him and God. And he kind of went into hiding. When God convicts you of something, the worst thing you can do is go into hiding. The worst thing you can do is run. Surrender to God and let him help you to draw toward him, to repent, and to be restored. God began the healing process in Moses through the family of Jethro. There, in Jethro's home, he found safety and security with a man who was known as friend of God. His name meant friend of God. Jethro was a priest. He served God. And Moses found himself in a home where he could focus on coming to know God. God will put us in places where we can grow and be safe at the same time. God puts us in churches where we can have the safety of our church family and grow and step into our calling. Let's look at Exodus 3, 1 through 10. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Moreover, he said, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt, and have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land, unto a good land and a large, unto a land flowing with milk and honey, unto the place of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is coming to me, and I have also seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians oppressed them. Come now therefore, and I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Moses was on the backside of the desert, wandering around, finding pasture for that father-in-law's flocks. Off to himself, plenty of time to think about life, plenty of time to wonder, why am I even here? Sometimes we get in those positions where we ask ourselves, why am I even here? What has God even brought me to this place for? Historians will say that Moses spent 40 years there in that wilderness, taking care of Jethro's sheep, Jethro's animals. 40 years of wandering from place to place, finding food for those animals, learning how to offer care for God's creation that couldn't really care for itself. He was in training for leading the children of Israel. Caring for animals takes patience. It takes patience, I'm telling you. I grew up with my dad just about always having pigs or cows. Just about always, pigs or cows. And we had one pig. Y'all are going to think I'm awful when I tell this story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. That pig, that old sow, she did not like being in that field that we had those pigs in. And Daddy had an electric fence that went around that field. We had 20 acres of land there in Griffith Creek, and he had a big part of it fenced, and that's where his pigs were when we had pigs. He had those pigs there on that land, and that old sow would decide that she was going to get on the other side of the fence. Thing looked better on the other side of the fence. And she would back up and look at that fence. And she'd let out the most awful squeal in the world. And then she'd run through that fence and break that fence and go through it. She knew before she ever ran through it, she was going to get shocked. But she was going to go through it anyway. And I hated that pig. Y'all don't, you animal lovers don't judge me, but I was about, 11, 12 years old. Daddy worked 6, 7 days a week. Big part of the time when the sow pulled that caper, he was off to work. So guess who had to chase the pig down and get it back up? And you had to hope. Somebody had to stand there at the hole in the fence and hope the other pigs didn't charge through. Then you had all the pigs trying to chase them around the neighborhood and get them back in. And that pig, I just hated that. I hated that pig. I was so glad when Daddy got rid of that pig because it was just a constant trying to get her back where she belonged. I can imagine Moses dealing with those sheep. There had to be that one sheep. You know, there's always that one in the bunch. There had to be that one sheep that would go astray. And here he's having to chase it down and get it back where it belongs. God was building patience in him. God was building kindness, tenderness, loving care in him. Because he was about to lead 1 million people or more that were just about as hard-headed as that pig I was telling you about. Just about as hard-headed as some of those sheep he was caring for. He was in training. Being in training's no fun. Anybody ever been in training for ministry? You're on the back side of the desert going, what in the world is God doing? Why am I even here? This makes no sense to me. You know, Moses was probably walking around going, this makes no sense to me. Man, back in the palace, I would have had this and this and this and this. What is God doing? Why am I here? And suddenly he has another life-changing moment. An encounter with God at a burning bush. One that doesn't burn. And he's wondering, why is that bush not being consumed? And he turns aside and God speaks to him. And God calls him to go and lead his people out of Egypt. What we often see as a time of crisis is actually a time of preparation for ministry. If you're in a tough spot in your life right now, could be for one of two reasons. Could be you're reaping the consequences of sin, or it could be that God's preparing you for ministry. Because adversity builds character. If you want to become a better person, you got to face some tough situations that require you to be the better person. And that becomes a part of who you are. You learn how to deal with conflict without losing control of your tongue. I'm getting there. I'm getting there, slowly but surely. You learn how to deal with difficult people without becoming a difficult person yourself. I'm getting there. Still have challenges sometimes. Still have some of those people that I'm just like, okay, I'm going to go the other way because I know how this is going to turn out. God's building character in me through adversity. God was building character through him. Someone said one time that our test becomes our testimony, and our mess becomes our message. And I believe that's true. I believe when we surrender to God, what we've been through in life, we can testify of God's grace and his love and his mercy. What we've made a mess of in life, we can give a message to others of, hey, there's hope. We can do that because of being on that backside of the desert. Exodus 4:18 through 20. And Moses went and returned to Jethro his father-in-law and said unto him, Let me go, I pray thee, and return unto my brethren which are in Egypt, and see whether they be yet alive. And Jethro said to Moses, Go in peace. And the Lord said unto Moses in Midian, Go return into Egypt, for all the men are dead which sought thy life. And Moses took his wife and his sons and set them upon an ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand. Moses has learned how to submit to authority. He goes to a father-in-law and says, Hey, I need your blessing. I need to leave your household and go to Egypt to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Jethro had become the leader of Moses' family. He was the patriarch of the family. Moses was living with him. In that society, in that culture at that time, the oldest male was in charge of everybody under him. So even though Moses was an adult, he was still under Jethro's authority because he had married that daughter and moved in with him. He was under his authority. When you left your father's house in the ancient world, if you left without the proper blessing from your father, you're disgracing your father. And Moses did not want to bring disgrace upon that household. Jethro blessed Moses and told him to go in peace. Moses was assured that by God that the people who had sought to kill him were gone. He didn't have to worry about his life. He may have started feeling comfortable there in Jethro's house, but it was time to move to that next phase of his life. It may be that you're in a place where you're feeling really comfortable. Don't be surprised if God stirs your nest. Don't be surprised if God mixes things up a little bit and moves you on to something else. Because we're not made to sit and be comfortable. We're made to be about the Father's business. And being about the Father's business sometimes is very uncomfortable. So Moses is moving on, and he's going to Egypt to deliver those children of Israel. So last week, we read about the deliverance. We read about those plagues on Egypt. We read about how that the firstborn in each household was killed if they didn't have the blood applied to the doorpost. And we read about, that they spoiled the Egyptians and left with their silver and their gold. And we're fast forwarding way ahead to the children of Israel. They've already crossed the Red Sea, and they're out in the wilderness. And Moses is having to deal with that bunch of hard-headed people. All right, let's go to Exodus chapter 18. So we're skipping way over. Exodus chapter 18, verses 7 through 12. And Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and did obeisance and kissed him, and they asked each other of their welfare, and they came into the tent. And Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done unto Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and all the travail that had come upon them by the way, and how the Lord delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced for all the goodness which the Lord had done to Israel, whom he had delivered out of the hand of the Egyptians. And Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who hath delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, who hath delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, for in the thing wherein they dealt proudly, he was above them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took a burnt offering and sacrifices for God. And Aaron came and all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law before God. So that chapter 18 opens talking about Jethro hearing of what God had done for Israel, what had happened in Egypt. And he wanted to know firsthand. He wanted to hear it not secondhand. He wanted to go to the man who would be able to confirm the stories he'd heard. So he went and found Moses there in the wilderness with those Israelites. And he went to say, hey, tell me about the plagues on Egypt. Tell me about the Red Sea parting. Tell me about what's happened with you and these people. Tell me about what God has done for you. And Moses began to tell what had happened. Jethro also brought Moses' family to him. He brought his wife and his children to him. Somewhere between Moses leaving to go to Egypt and deliver the Israelites and this moment when they're in the wilderness, they've crossed the Red Sea and all that, his wife and children wound up back with the father-in-law. The Bible does not tell us why. We don't know if Moses thought, well, she'd be better off with her daddy and, watched over while I'm getting them free from Egypt. We don't know if that was the case. We don't know if she just rebelled and said, I'm not having any part of this. I'm going back to daddy's. We don't know what happened, but somewhere between him leaving with that wife and children and going to Egypt and this moment, she's left and been with daddy. And he's brought Moses' family to him because families should be together. Families should not be separated. And Jethro knows that. So he brings her to him. Let's take a look at what happens here in verses 13 through 27. And it came to pass on the morrow that Moses sat to judge the people. And the people stood by Moses from the morning unto the evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he did to the people, he said, What is this thing that thou doest to the people? Why sittest thou thyself alone, and all the people stand by thee from morning unto evening? And Moses said unto his father-in-law, Because the people come unto me to inquire of God. When they have a matter, they come unto me, and I judge between one and another. And I do make them know the statutes of God and his laws. And Moses' father-in-law said unto him, The thing that thou doest is not good. Thou wilt surely wear away both thou and this people that is with thee, for this thing is too heavy for thee. Thou art not able to perform it thyself alone. Hearken now unto my voice. I will give thee counsel, and God shall be with thee. Be thou for the people to Godward, that thou mayest bring the causes unto God. And thou shalt teach them ordinances and laws, and shalt shew them the way wherein they must walk, and the work that they must do. Moreover, thou shalt provide out of all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, and rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And let them judge the people at all seasons, and it shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto thee, but every small matter they shall judge. so shall it be easier for thyself, and they shall bear the burden with thee. If thou shalt do this thing, and God command thee so, then thou shalt be able to endure, and all this people shall also go to their place in peace. So Moses hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law, and did all that he had said. And Moses chose able men out of all Israel, and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And they judged the people at all seasons. The hard causes they brought unto Moses, but every small matter they judged themselves. And Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went his way into his own land. Moses was giving people the directions from God, what God would have them to do. They possibly were having arguments about something. They would come to him for him to settle the argument. They didn't understand something. They'd come to him with their questions. It sounds like he's doing good. He's being the leader. But in essence, he's not doing good because he's wearing himself out, and he's wearing the people out, because he's trying to take care of all these people all by himself. You can't do that. If God has put you in charge of something, you can't be that one person that takes care of it all by yourself. Sometimes you've got to have help. You've got to delegate some of those responsibilities. These people were slaves before they were brought out of Egypt. The slaves would have been totally dependent, pretty much, on the Egyptians for a lot of their day-to-day decisions, because it would be, well, what does Pharaoh want us to do? What does Pharaoh say we can do? Do we have permission to do this? And there's a term in education called learned helplessness. Learned helplessness. And pretty much what it is if you help somebody too much, they learn to be helpless so you can help them. We got a whole lot of that in the world today. People have been helped and helped and helped to their destruction, and they don't know how to do for themselves because somebody has been there to clean up their mess and give them support every single time they have a problem. Sometimes, and parents, this is hard, I know, but sometimes when your kid has a problem, don't fix it for them. Make them figure out how to fix their mess. How do I get out of this problem? What do I do to help myself? Moses is dealing with a bunch of people that have fallen into learned helplessness, and they're trying to go to him for everything. And it's wearing him out. And it's wearing the people out. Because think about human nature. Anybody ever been standing in line at the Dollar General, the Walmart somewhere, and you got, half a dozen people in front of you? And before you ever get to the register, you're in a mood. And it's not a good one. You're like, I left dinner cooking. It's going to be burnt. I was running down here for 5 minutes. I've been here for 15. I better call Steve and tell him to flip that chicken over, or we're going to be eating burnt chicken. No, I was supposed to just be in here for about 5 minutes because I got an appointment at Dr. McKeon's office. I'm going to be late. They're going to tell me I'm just going to have to reschedule. There's no peace in that when we're having to stand in line because we're impatient people. Even the most patient of people will get impatient standing in line. Well, imagine being out in the wilderness, standing in line, waiting for Moses to answer your question. Those people would have been impatient. They couldn't go back to their tents in peace because they stood there all day long. I got in line at 6 o'clock this morning. It's 5 o'clock this evening. I'm still standing in line. I wish he'd hurry up. I know my business is more important than theirs. Are we guilty? I'm guilty. I'm guilty. I wish they'd quit talking. They're the cashier. Just ring their groceries up and get them out the door so I can get mine. Maybe that person needs somebody to talk to. Maybe they need somebody to talk to. Maybe they don't have anybody at home to talk to. And they need that few minutes of socialization. But it would have been difficult here for Moses. He's wearing himself out. And Jethro says, you can't keep doing this. You've got to delegate some of this responsibility. Look, find you some responsible people. They can be over 100 people, 50 people, 10 people. Let them take care of the little issues and let them send the big problems to you. Did you know that Pastor Nathan has put this into place here at Gruetli? He's put this into place because he's one person. He and Sister Faith are one couple. They can't do everything. It'll wear them out. It'll wear them out. They'll have nothing left to give because they are human beings. They get tired just like we do. So he doesn't drive the van. He's got Sister Heather and Sister Felicia to do that. And we've got other people on the insurance that can drive those vans in case one of them has to be out. He's got Brother Jeremy leading our praise and worship. He's got Jeremy and Jamie over the teens. Mr. Steve and I over the middle schoolers. He's got Brother Mike as his clerk. Take care of the financial aspects. Make sure that the light bill's paid and the water bill's paid, because I really don't want to come here without lights and water. Brother Mike takes care of that for us, so we can all come here and we can have air conditioning today. He pays that bill out of what we contribute. We've got Sister Roberta who's greeting people, hugging necks. Look at all you folks that have a place. Bree, in our children's church, teaching those littles. Everybody has a place here. If you don't have something to do, go to them and ask them what you can do. I guarantee you they'll find you something to do. A good leader delegates responsibility to others. A good leader will find some people that want to serve God and have the Christian values and the maturity they need to do what needs to be done. And that leader will pass those responsibilities to others. Moses didn't stop being the leader. He didn't stop handling the bigger issues because that was his job. He was in charge. It was God and then Moses. He was second in command there. He was in charge. He had to handle some issues. But some of those he could pass off. He passed off to keep from being worn out. As people of the church, we've got to make ourselves available to our leaders so that we can go to our homes in peace, knowing that what's needing to be done here at the church is done. And our leader can focus on the big issues, what they need to handle themselves. There's a whole lot of little stuff that needs to be done that they really don't need to be doing. And we need to be sure that we make ourselves available for that. You know, I called names. I left some people out. We got Owen and Sister Linda that clean up on Wednesday nights, just about every Wednesday night. They're in there helping clean up. I'm going to get in trouble because I've called names. So if I left you out, please don't get offended. Moses followed Jethro's advice. He took his counsel and went with it. Did you know it's important when you have someone who's in charge and they're doing wrong? It's important to approach them in the right way. Jethro approached Moses in the right way. And it's important for us to respond correctly. Moses honored Jethro's correction. Moses stepped back and looked and said, you know what, he's right. This is wearing me out. I'm going to take his advice and I'm going to do this. The relationship between Moses and Jethro honored God. when we take counsel from others who have more wisdom in the area they're giving us counsel in, and we apply that to our life so that we can be more effective in the kingdom of God, we're not only honoring that person, we're honoring God. It's important for anybody that's involved in anything with the church that you be able to take correction without allowing yourself to be offended. I'm an adult, but I'm not beyond taking correction. We never need to feel like we can't take correction from somebody. There's always going to be somebody that's going to have a little bit more wisdom in something that maybe you don't have wisdom in. I lack wisdom in some areas. I need people to speak into my life, whether they're older than me or younger than me. I need people to speak wisdom into my life in some areas. I need to speak wisdom into people's lives in some areas. We can all gain from that. We can honor each other and we can honor God through serving God's people and serving God. Moses was carrying guilt and shame from a mistake he made of killing that Egyptian. But he had a God-honoring relationship with a father-in-law who brought healing and refuge, and God brought restoration to his life. When our lives are transitioning from one season to the next, we can find counsel and support. If you think about it, very often when you get in a tight spot, you don't know what to do. You should turn to God. That's first. Turn to God. Ask Him what He'd have you to do. Sometimes God wants to speak to you through one of His people. Don't be too proud to look at somebody and say, hey, I need help. That's one of the pitfalls of being an adult and serving God, is we want to just be an adult. I've got it under control. What if you don't? There have been times in my life when my life felt like it was spiraling out of control, Sister Linda. I needed some mama I could talk to. Somebody, Sister Roberta, that would say, now listen, honey. I can just hear you saying that. Now listen, honey. Sometimes we've got to call on those people that serve God and have that wisdom, and will take us under their wing, and we'll say, it'll pass. It'll be okay. Find time to find counsel and support from others. Find time for yourself. For yourself. Bree, you got little kids. Some of the best time of your life raising those babies. Some of the hardest time of your life raising those babies. Find some time for you. Don't wear yourself out. Find you a babysitter. Find you a babysitter every now and then. And just be Bree, not Mama. You older folks, you got grandbabies. Don't let those grandbabies camp out at grandparents' houses all the time. You need some grandma time as just grandma. And those babies need to go home to mamas and daddies. Find some time to get with God and renew yourself through time spent with God. It's hard. We've all got challenges. No matter what age we are, we've got challenges that will drain us. And we've got to find time to do that. When we journey with other believers, we can celebrate what God has done. Moses and Jethro had a sacrifice and a meal there after Moses shared what God had done to the Egyptians. They celebrated together. We come together this morning to celebrate the God we serve. We celebrate Him. And not only do we celebrate, but we receive wisdom for what God is doing next and encouragement to continue on with God. God bless you.